So let's look at an example of how one system was able to use SureImpact, and all of this data that I'm sharing came from this system's SureImpact account to not only communicate their impact, but to drive change. So they went into their SureImpact environment, and this is me telling a story. They were able to talk about how just since September, so again, this is only 6 months of information, but since September, they had served 952 youth in their after-school programs. They had delivered, so again, that's who they served. They had delivered 15,000 hours of services, and 27 different service activities had been provided to these 952 after-school programs. Now, most nonprofits, that's all they can tell. They stop there. They don't go any further. But now, this system, because they had all this information at their fingertips, were able to talk about how after just one semester of programming, 65% of the students now had typical or above average social emotional skills. And they were using the DESA assessment to measure social emotional skills. But all of this information was in their SureImpact analytics. They didn't have to go, hire a data scientist to do any of it. It just was there for them to tell this story. But they were able to go even further with their analytics. They were able to talk about who they served. Now, in this case, they had a data compliance issue, and they were looking at their system. It looked like most providers were not entering race and gender of their students. So that's okay. But it's something to note, right? If you don't have this information, you can't talk about it. You can't look at differences. But they did know for those who they had data for, there was an equal proportion of boys and girls. So if they were talking to a funder who wanted to make sure that one population wasn't not getting served at the same rate as others, they were able to say at least gender ratio, for those that we knew, it was equal. And in this case, the majority of the students identified as Black or African American for those race that they knew. They also were able to talk about where students were coming from, which is really, really important. However, they did not, 40% of the students' zip codes were unknown. So again, that's a data quality visibility piece where it's like, if we really want to understand place-based analysis, we probably should work to collect more zip codes. But they also knew, for those that they knew, the zip codes where most of the children were coming from, or youth were coming from. They were also able to understand service activities and service hours. So when they looked at what were the kids wanting to do, this helps better with programming. So sports, arts, life skills tutoring were their highest activities. So again, think about your own work and think about how this data could help you better tell your story and use it to improve your service offerings. So that was what they did and who they served. Now they wanted to understand how are these young people better off. They did learn that males had slightly higher success rates when they were looking at the social emotional skills. So 70% of boys were at the cutoff versus 67% of girls. Probably not statistically significant. However, still, you could see the trend that boys had a little higher of a success rate. They also found no meaningful differences between race categories, which is a good thing, right? We want to make sure that our students are all being treated equally. And they also found some interesting trends between those who did have higher social emotional learning improvements and those who didn't, which makes this data so useful to be able to understand the differences. So if we drilled even further into their analytics, and again, everything I'm showing you here, they were able to quickly just answer through their SureImpact. No extra data analysis was needed. So when they looked at the difference between those who had yet to get to typical or strength DESA scores, they were able to see the activities were different. So the kids who were still needed, they predominantly only went to swim, movies, and some STEAM activities. Where those who had improved to the typical and strength, they were involved in more variety of activities. They went to art, sports, guest facilitators, and swim. So again, I'm not saying that this one thing caused another, but it starts to highlight, well, maybe more variety helps us increase those social emotional abilities better. There was also some differences in zip codes, which also helps understand, okay, maybe this particular location or this area needs a little more diversity of programming, or maybe they have some extra needs. So it really helped them understand where they need to target and change their interventions. So using that data, you can see how you can use it to celebrate and how you can use it to change. And that's what we want to inspire cultures of. We want to inspire that having this type of information, it goes beyond just telling a great story. It goes beyond your fundraising and your development efforts. It should be part of improving your operations, increasing your effectiveness and your efficiency, increasing your accountability so that you can deliver the real change in your organization. So these were just some other findings they found and opportunities for improvement, looking at that data, that less than 2% of the students that were being served were actually coming from the highest rates of the juvenile justice and juvenile arrest areas. And why this is important for this particular organization, and think about this for your own story that you would tell, is that if funders are funding your program because they're looking to see decreases in juvenile crime, and your programs aren't impacting or working with the students highest at risk of those behaviors, it is very likely that your funders will not see change in the community. And if your funders are not seeing change in the community and you can't show them how you're helping with that change in the community, then guess what? They will budget decisions come to make, and they're like, we're not funding that program. It wasn't effective. So this system could get ahead of it, and they could say, you know what, we looked at our data, we realized we need some outreach efforts in these zip codes, or we need to open a new site in the zip code, and it helps them guide their program behavior before potentially losing funding. And there was a slight difference between boys and girls. So that's just a curiosity that they could look into, as well as they could look into the relationship between programming at the different locations and how it's having on social emotional learning.